I've been playing guitar for about 30 years now, and most of that time I've had a crazy vibe that something profound and big was happening inside our brains. As guitarists, or even as any musician really, the whole concept of improvisation is just bonkers. And you think of like the thought processes that we must be going through when we're like improvising over some complicated stuff. It's crazy. And this is something that I've been researching for years. As you know, I've got a strong interest in psychology and neuroscience as well as music. And I'm trying to marry the two to basically make me a better musician, really. I'm not going to lie about it. I think the more we know about neuroscience and what's happening inside our brains when we study music or when we perform or learn, the better we'll be equipped to plan our study a lot better. So like my intention with this video and with a lot of videos in this playlist series is just to raise a bit of awareness about the physical and neurological differences and transformations that are happening as we practice and play. Not only to understand and serve our musicianship better, but also to support our personal well-being and our own lifelong development. When you learn a new skill, you put in consistent repetition on learning that new skill. There's a lot of things you learn from the process of it, and these are all tools that you can carry into new skill learning. For example, if you're good on guitar, you've done it through hard work and practice, consistent repetition. So if you was to say start whittling wood, you know that if you put a consistent pattern in of practicing with a piece of wood and a knife, eventually you'll be whittling whatever shape you want. It's like anything, what you put into it is what you get out. Every thought we have and every single thing that happens in life has an experience on us. Every phrase we practice on the guitar has a tangible effect on our brain. It's not just like a poetic metaphor, it's reality. Our neural pathways and architecture are constantly reshaping and rewiring itself in accordance with our daily experiences and emotions and stuff like that. We call this neuroplasticity, and it sort of underpins all learning, adaptation and growth that we go through. We're very unique in that our brains are constantly developing. They say it's wired to negativity more than positivity, but that's just a survival thing. It responds quicker, it learns quicker through negativity. But essentially our brains are constantly rewiring themselves in reaction to our experiences and environment. So to help us understand how the processes of the brain work, we're going to have a very basic look at the parts of the brain and what they do. I recommend though, researching this yourself and going onto YouTube and just looking at more in-depth videos explaining the brain. But basically we have three main parts coming off the spinal cord. We have the hindbrain, the midbrain and the forebrain. And just below the hindbrain as well, you can see there's a big red area. That's the cerebellum. That's involved in a lot of movements and coordination. So looking a bit further into the brain, we have the lobes. And I always remember this as the phrase F-pot. You have at the front of your head, the frontal lobe. Then we have the parietal lobe. Then at the back, the occipital lobe, which is the purpley blue one. And then the green one is the temporal lobe. And then just before them, you can see the cerebellum again and the spinal cord. We'll have a look now at what each of these individual lobes do and what they're responsible for and how they can affect the musician's brain. So now let's have a quick look at what the actual functions of the lobes are. And we'll start in the order F-pot. So the frontal lobe, as you can see, that's responsible for problem solving and judgments, inhibition, personality and emotions. A lot of your executive planning goes on in this area. Then beyond that we have the parietal lobe, which is all to do with touch, taste, smell, spatial perception and visual perception. A lot of attributes like reading and maths and writing are labelled to happen in this area. Then beyond that, in the blue area, we have the occipital lobe, and this is basically responsible for all vision and interpretation of any visual stimulus. It's sometimes why if people get a knock to the back of the head, they sometimes go blind. And then at the bottom you can see the temporal lobe, which again is all about understanding language and organisation, information, memory, hearing, The hippocampus is actually located just at the top of the temporal lobe, and that is responsible for a lot of our memory function and stuff like that. So you can see again the cerebellum and the brainstem. They're involved. The brainstem basically regulates all your stuff, all your autopilot stuff, your sense of balance, reflexes, breathing, stuff like that. In regards to how this all affects the brain, certain areas have different effects on the brain. You'd often hear that myth that we only use a small percentage of the brain and a lot of it's unused. That's actually bull. All of the brain is used for various things. A lot of the time we might be only using a small part of the brain for that specific task, but in other instances parts of the brain collaborate and all work together. And with music, it's a really bizarre thing because it involves an awful lot of your brain. Your brain basically lights up a lot of the time when you're doing music. And just looking here, you look at your brainstem, controlling all your regulation, your breathing and your sense of balance and that. That's something we're using in music, and you look at the frontal lobe, where emotions are getting brought into it. We're planning what we're going to do. The parietal lobe is making awareness of where we are in the environment, and if we're counting or anything like that, that's going to be happening there. The occipital lobe is vision. A lot of us are looking and reading visual cues when performing. And the cerebellum, coordination, balance. No one stands still and performs. So we can see already all 4 lobes are going to be working together when performing an instrument. But music is all based around the auditory cortex, and it's essentially our software that has been programmed and written into our brains that will respond to language or to music upon exposure. The hippocampus, as I say, that does all music and memories and experience. The visual cortex, we'll be using that if we're chart reading or, looking at people interacting whilst we're performing music. The cerebellum, again, that's all coordination, so that would help us with the movements and emotional reactions. And we've got the corpus callosum again, which I always remember as the Rain Man area, and that connects both sides of the brains. Motor cortex, that's involved in all our movements, especially, if playing an instrument, there's a lot of movements involved. The prefrontal cortex, that's all our behaviour, expression, decision making. As I say, I always remember this as our executive control or planning, really. And also there's the nucleus or the amygdala, which is basically involved with our emotional responses to music and our expectations of music. Throughout your brain you have a lot of neurons, and these basically consist of a cell or a cell body and a dendrite that receives signals, and they have this long axon attached to them, which is basically what takes the signal or the electrical signal down it to the terminal. And these synapses are all spaced really close to each other. There's a small gap between each terminal, and they'll fire the information from the terminals to each other. It's basically the critical junction where the communication occurs, and it's like a really elaborate choreography of how an electrical impulse with a bit of chemical signalling provides all the reception for the info to be passed. It's bonkers. Basically our brains turn a chemical reaction into electricity and send it down the synapse. But every time a signal is sent down that path, it reinforces that connection, and it will cause the dendrites to grow and for the basic synapse to become more efficient, basically. And over time, they'll become more robust and automatic. They'll become second nature and almost like consolidated to your long-term memory. Now, what's actually happening is the axon it is covered by a protein called myelin, and as the experience is repeated, or the thought, or whatever it is, the action potential is repeated, the brain will coat this with more myelin, essentially making it thicker. And like I say, myelin is just a lipid-rich sheath that wraps around the axon. How I always remembered it was like a guitar cable. You've got the copper wire inside, and then we've got the plastic or rubber coating to protect that copper wire. It's the same with a brain synapse. The synapse is the copper wire, and the myelin is the plastic coating around the cable. In this case, it's protein wrapped around the synapse to protect it. But the more myelin you have, the thicker it gets and the faster it gets. So that's the big thing here. The thicker the synapse, the faster and more efficient it is. So basically, with practice, our brain will just increase the myelination along that pathway, enhancing speed and accuracy and reliability of transmission, and it basically rewires our brain for it to become second nature. So it's not just in guitar, it's in everything. Even you do a negative experience, it will just keep rewiring that negative experience. So there's loads of ways in which music can contribute to the rewiring of our brain, or neuroplasticity, in various regions. And there's lots of research, peer-reviewed research, that demonstrates all this. You know, if you just go onto like PubMed, type in anything, any keywords, it'll load up loads of peer-reviewed research, which you can read yourself and formulate your own theories or hypotheses. But basically, a lot of it compares musicians with non-musicians, and you can see that certain areas of the brain are enlarged, like the hippocampus and the primary auditory cortex and motor regions and frontal areas, which are all linked to like executive function and memory. So, you know, I'm no Einstein, but if you're going to make the part of the brain responsible for memory bigger, more efficient, that's going to be a massive improvement to not just your musical playing ability, but every aspect of your life. So these are some of the powerful effects that learning an instrument can have. There was a great study that used fMRI to examine our music students before and after 2 semesters of intensive music training, what happened to them basically. And the results showed that they had increased neural responses in the hippocampus, and it showed that musical training can induce neuroplasticity within the hippocampus. Another study showed that musicians had a stronger activation and greater grey matter density in the hippocampus and medial frontal regions, which greatly affected long-term memory retrieval tasks and stuff like that. We'll talk a bit more about cognitive reserve as well, and how that can really help us in later life. So honestly, if I was the government, I would make learning an instrument mandatory, because the benefits it would have to that individual person in later life, physical and mental benefits, would save the public health services millions and millions. But like, you know, the benefits of musicianship, it just keeps extending into older adulthood. And a lot of music practice correlates with, as I said, greater volume in your prefrontal, your insular, your orbital frontal, your posterior cingulate, and all the other cortices, all these regions, you know, really critical for executive control, memory, emotional regulation, cognitive flexibility, all giving us enhancements that will contribute to what psychologists will call cognitive reserve. Research is still early into this, it's been going on for a few decades now, but they've noticed that most of us get Alzheimer's and Parkinson's in our 80s. You know, 95% of us get it. It's weird, and the cause of it is age. It's just age. It's the cell replicating so many thousands of times or hundreds of thousands of times that it eventually loses the ability to replicate itself fully. And with each replication, it's just slightly less efficient or less like the very first cell. So cognitive reserve is where people build up extra areas of grey matter within the brain. Scientists and neuroscientists haven't discovered the exact reason why yet, but they've noticed that people with large amounts of grey matter just don't show the symptoms of Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. They may have the disease, but they just won't show the symptoms. And then through doing studies, historic studies, and sort of interviewing people about their lifestyles and all like that, they've realised that if you have an active lifestyle, a mentally active lifestyle, you will have a larger amount of grey matter. So learning a skill like music is so important to building cognitive reserve, which will just benefit you later up in life. When you pick up your guitar and you engage it, you're focused, and when you repeat practice, you know, you're basically rewiring your brain, you're reinforcing synaptic pathways, you're increasing your myelin over them, you're expanding your memory related structures, you know, you're strengthening your sensory motor integration, and all this will just cultivate resilience that will protect your brain against decline. Practicing guitar, you know, we're not evolving our entire architecture, it's just little bits that we're improving every day. But the main thing is it definitely deepens memory, it can improve IQ. Check out my other video, the Mozart effect, which talks about how studying or listening specifically to classical music will increase your IQ by 10%. There's so many positives to learning an instrument, especially on our brain. So like I say, I'm a musician from Liverpool with decades of experience, and recognising the powerful transformation my practice and my approach to practice, my approach to music has had since just discovering a bit about psychology and neuroscience has really helped me, not just as an artist, but you know, also helped me improve my own mental health, my own robustness and personal growth. So I recommend learning an instrument to everyone. So I just want to thank you all for watching the video. Sorry for waffling on. Hope it's been informative, and I'll see you all soon.